It's a hot summer day. The sun is slowly sinking behind the horizon, flooding the small suburb with soft golden light. Aisha is walking down the street, holding several books in her hands. She looks thoughtful, a little tense, but tries to keep a low profile. In her 20s, she has already learned to hide her true feelings. Her family has always reminded her of the importance of restraint and decorum, especially in a foreign country where they have recently settled. Aisha stops near a small park. People are walking home after work, someone is walking a dog, and a few children are playing by the fountain. She breathes in the fresh air and looks at the people, feeling involuntarily envious of their freedom. Her gaze stops on a young black girl sitting on a bench nearby, reading a book. She looks calm, relaxed, as if nothing is bothering her. The girl notices Aisha's gaze, looks up and smiles slightly. Aisha suddenly looks away, feeling her heartbeat accelerate. She wants to leave, but her legs don't obey. She looks back at the girl who continues to smile, as if inviting Aisha to come over. Attempts to overcome her inner turmoil prove futile, and Aisha takes a few steps toward the bench as if mesmerized. She sits down on the other end, being careful. "Hi," the girl says quietly, not looking up from her book. Aisha nods, smiling slightly. She tries not to show her excitement, but her voice trembles as she replies, "Hi." There is silence for a few seconds. Aisha feels as if this stranger has some invisible power over her. She wants to ask her questions, but she doesn't find the words. Finally, the girl breaks the silence herself. "I'm Claire. And you?" "Aisha," she answers quietly, trying to look calm. Claire smiles again, and their first conversation, however brief, leaves a mark on Aisha's heart. She feels an unusual connection to this girl, even though they have only exchanged a few words. Aisha doesn't know what exactly attracts her: Claire's mysterious calmness, her smile, or perhaps just her courage. However, she realizes that this feeling is dangerous. It is already dark when Aisha gets up from the bench. She is reluctant to say goodbye to Claire, but something in her tells her that this is not the last time they will meet. Feeling a forbidden urge rising inside her, she quickly walks away, trying to hide her excitement. But even at that moment, she knows she will return here. Claire stays on the bench, watching Aisha disappear into the darkness. Her smile grows wider. She knows that this evening was special, and she looks forward to seeing her again. A few days pass after their chance meeting in the park. Aisha tries to concentrate on her studies and chores, but her thoughts of Claire never leave her. Her life usually follows a strict schedule: morning prayers, university, household chores, and meetings with relatives. Aisha grew up in a family where traditions and rules have always come first. Her parents tried to protect her from the influence of the outside world, often reminding her that she was a member of the Muslim community and should behave in accordance with the traditions. Aisha realizes that their culture would not accept her attraction to Claire. Her feeling is forbidden, shy, and secret, but at the same time, incredibly strong. Claire is a breath of fresh air that Aisha has needed for so long. All the previous thoughts, dreams of freedom and independence that she had been trying to suppress inside herself, are now coming to the surface. Claire, in turn, is also living a difficult life. She recently moved to the neighborhood with her family and doesn't have many friends. At university, she tries to be confident, but often feels isolated because of her skin color and religious views. She feels misunderstood and lonely. Meeting Aisha has been a breath of warmth and support for her. Claire feels that Aisha is hiding a lot of fears and worries. Her shyness and caution remind Claire of her own feelings. She feels a special connection with her that is difficult to describe in words. She is attracted not only by Aisha's outward beauty, but also by her mystery, her desire to explore the world, which she hides behind a mask of restraint. One day, after classes at the university, Aisha meets Claire again. They accidentally cross paths in the corridor. Aisha is surprised because until now she thought that their meeting was a coincidence, but now she realizes that perhaps fate is giving her a sign. "Hi," Claire says, noticing Aisha. Her voice sounds warm and friendly. Aisha nods and replies with a slight smile. "Hi." Without waiting for an answer, Claire invites her to go for coffee together. Aisha thinks about it for a moment, weighing the pros and cons, but eventually agrees. She feels that this is a risky decision, but her curiosity and desire to be with Claire prevail over her fear. They choose a small coffee shop that is located away from the usual crowded places. Sitting at a table near the window, Aisha listens intently as Claire talks about her life, her dreams, interests, and difficulties. Every word she says seems to remove a layer of protection that Aisha has been working so hard to build around herself. Aisha is a little nervous, but gradually begins to open up. She tells Claire about her life, her responsibilities to her family, her fears and aspirations, which she could never tell even to her closest friends. She talks about how she wants to feel free, how she dreams of being able to be herself without feeling the constant pressure of tradition. Claire listens attentively, gently supporting Aisha from time to time. She tries to make her understand that her feelings are not a sin and that she has the right to be happy, even if it goes against her cultural and religious beliefs. Their conversation continues until late in the evening, and despite her caution, Aisha feels alive and free for the first time in a long time. When they say goodbye outside the coffee shop, Claire smiles again and says, "I hope to see you again." Aisha nods silently, feeling her heart beating furiously in her chest. She does not respond with words, but she knows that she will not be able to stay away. This chance meeting has become something more for her, a step toward the freedom she has been seeking for so long. Aisha returns home late, trying to keep herself in check and not let her excitement show in front of her family. Her thoughts are filled with new emotions and impressions. She knows that her journey with Claire may be dangerous, but her desire to live a full life prevails. Aisha tries to focus on her usual routine, but thoughts of Claire overwhelm her mind. She feels a connection with her that she had previously thought impossible. Her heart flutters every time she recalls their last meeting in a coffee shop, where she dared to open up and tell her deepest fears and dreams. When she runs into Claire again at university, Aisha realizes that this meeting is another sign. Claire smiles kindly, and a subtle tension arises between them that feels both natural and exciting. Claire invites Aisha to go for a walk in the evening, and without thinking about the consequences, she agrees. She can't stop. Every moment with Claire becomes a small celebration of freedom for her. In the evening, they meet at their usual place, a park by the lake. The sun is already setting, and the sky is shimmering with crimson and purple hues. They walk along the calm water, discussing movies, books, and travels they dream about. Aisha doesn't even notice how her worries are dissolving in this light but fascinating conversation. Claire looks at Aisha with interest, noticing how her face lights up when she talks about her dreams. She sees Aisha not only as a reserved Muslim woman, but also as a person searching for her own identity and freedom. For Claire, Aisha becomes the personification of beauty, which is hidden behind strict rules and traditions. She wants to break down this barrier, to allow Aisha to feel true freedom. Suddenly, Claire takes Aisha's hand. Aisha's body freezes in surprise, but she does not pull her hand away. On the contrary, her heart beats even faster, and she feels a strange warmth that envelops her body in a wave. For the first time in her life, she doesn't feel afraid, only admiration and tenderness that spills over from the inside. "Aisha, have you ever thought that life could be different?" Claire asks softly, looking into her eyes. Aisha is silent for a few seconds, looking into Claire's eyes, which reflect the slowly fading sunlight. She realizes that she has known the answer for a long time, but she has always been afraid to admit it out loud. "Yes," she answers quietly. "I've always thought about it, but I never imagined that someone could help me see this other world." Claire squeezes her hand lightly and says, "I'm here for you. We can do this together." Their bond grows stronger with every word. At this moment, in a peaceful park under a dusky sky, they feel closer than ever. They walk for a long time, holding hands, as if the whole world had disappeared around them. It seems like a miracle to them, a moment they want to keep forever. However, their world only seems perfect for a few hours. On their way back, passing a group of strangers, they let go of their hands to avoid being noticed. Aisha feels afraid again. It seems to her that every glance of the people around her penetrates to the very depths of her secret. She looks around nervously, trying to find an excuse for her actions, but suddenly realizes that this is impossible. Claire notices her excitement and says, You are not alone. I'm with you, Aisha. We'll get through this. Aisha nods, but she is torn by an internal contradiction. She wants to believe Claire's words, but she also realizes how dangerous this path is. Her family, society, and religious beliefs all prevent her from being with the person she is beginning to love. When they say goodbye on the street corner, Aisha stands for a long time watching Claire walk away. Her heart is filled with conflicting feelings: fear, happiness, excitement, and regret. She knows that this bond is getting stronger and stronger, and that each new meeting brings them closer to the line that cannot be crossed. When Aisha returns home, she tries to hide her excitement, but her mother notices her confusion. "Aisha, you look different today," her mother says, looking at her face. Aisha smiles slightly, trying not to give away her true feelings. She realizes that she must now live with a secret that could destroy everything she knows. But despite all her fears, she can't and won't stop. Her soul has already made a choice, even if that choice will cause irreversible changes. This chance meeting, holding hands, and the promise of support turn her life into a mysterious romance full of risk and hope. Aisha and Claire now meet regularly, choosing quiet, secluded places where no one can see them together. Their passion grows with each meeting. Claire brings a lightness and courage to Aisha's life that she has been missing. With Claire, Aisha feels as if she has finally become herself, as if all the shackles that kept her soul under control have fallen away. One evening they spend by the lake, where the darkness and silence seem almost protective. Claire takes Aisha's hands, and in that moment, everything around them becomes insignificant. Their hands are intertwined and their eyes meet. Claire leans closer, and Aisha feels her warm breath on her cheek. Her heart is beating so hard that it seems to be heard throughout the neighborhood. "Aisha, you shouldn't be afraid to be happy," Claire says softly, brushing a strand of hair away from Aisha's face. "You deserve it." Aisha closes her eyes, feeling Claire's words penetrate deep into her heart. She feels overwhelmingly happy, but at the same time this happiness is mixed with fear. She knows that her family and society will never accept her feelings, and yet, despite all the circumstances, she continues to live in this moment. Their kiss is soft, like the careful touch of a feather. Aisha realizes that there is no turning back now. Her connection with Claire becomes more than just a friendship. It is the true, deep love she has been longing for, without even realizing it. As the days pass, Aisha and Claire find every opportunity to be together. They spend time in coffee shops, parks, and sometimes even go on small trips to the countryside where no one will recognize them. Their meetings are full of laughter, discussions of plans and dreams they cherish together. Claire assures Aisha that their relationship is not a sin, that everyone has the right to be happy. Every day, Aisha feels more and more free. She begins to think about leaving everything behind and starting a new life with Claire somewhere far away, where no one can judge them. Claire encourages her, saying that they can find a way to be together, no matter what the restrictions. However, Aisha is still afraid to reveal the truth to her family. She realizes that this relationship is like a dangerous game where every step can lead to disaster. Her heart is torn between her love for Claire and her fear of the consequences. She realizes that her family will never be able to accept her love for a woman, especially a woman of a different religion. And despite her dreams of the future, this fear constantly brings her back to reality. One day, during a regular walk, Aisha notices a man from their community staring at her and Claire. She knows this face well. He often comes to the mosque and knows her family. Aisha feels her insides tighten with fear. Her brain instantly begins to think of ways to explain her presence here with Claire to avoid suspicion. Claire notices her tension and squeezes her hand. "Is something wrong?" she asks, looking at Aisha with concern. Aisha nods, casting a quick glance at the man who has already continued on his way, but may have noticed them together. "This could ruin us, Claire," she says quietly, trying to hide her panic. "If anyone finds out, if my family finds out..." Claire hugs Aisha and says, "I'm with you, no matter what happens. We'll get through this together." Aisha wants to believe these words, but she realizes that reality can be cruel. She realizes that her love for Claire is like a forbidden fruit, sweet but poisonous. Their meetings become more and more risky, but the desire to be together does not subside. This feeling, this connection, is stronger than all fears, stronger than her duties and traditions, but it pulls them both into an abyss where every step can be fatal. Aisha tries to live as if everything remains in its place, but her inner world has long since changed. With each new meeting with Claire, she feels happy and at the same time increasingly immersed in fear and doubt. Her soul is torn between love and duty, between freedom and the fear of losing her family, her reputation, and even the life she knew before she met Claire. Claire senses this tension and becomes increasingly intolerant of Aisha's fears and hesitations. Her love for Aisha turns into an obsession. Claire cannot imagine living without her. She sees Aisha trying to distance herself again and again to avoid danger, and this only makes her jealousy worse. For Claire, this relationship has become her everything, her salvation from loneliness and sadness. One day, during a meeting in their favorite park, Claire loses her temper. They sit on a bench under the protection of dusk, and Claire tries to discuss their future together. She suggests to Aisha that they leave everything behind and start a new life together in another city where no one can find them. "We can be free, Aisha. Imagine, we can run away to a place where no one knows us. No one can judge us or separate us," Claire says, her voice full of determination. But Aisha hesitates. She looks at Claire with pain in her eyes, trying to explain that it's not that simple. She cannot leave her family, her faith, everything that has shaped her identity. Although she loves Claire, her fear of judgment and consequences prevents her from taking this step. "I can't, Claire. I just can't," Aisha whispers, looking away. "I'm afraid we'll lose everything." Disappointment and resentment overwhelm Claire. She doesn't understand why Aisha is clinging to something that only limits her and keeps her trapped. "You say you love me, but you're still afraid to take a step towards our future?" Claire's voice rises, and she can feel the bitterness in it. "If you really love me, you'll do everything so that we can be together. Why should I have to fight for your love while you're always hiding?" Aisha is silent, feeling deep shame and pain. She does not know how to explain her conflicting feelings. On the one hand, her love for Claire is real and strong, but on the other hand, her fear of society and her family is so great that she simply cannot overcome it. Claire's words pierce her, but she can't answer anything that would justify her hesitation. Claire sees this and bursts into tears. "Am I nothing but entertainment to you? Are you hiding because you think we can only be in the shadows? But I don't want to be just your secret, Aisha. I want to be a part of your life." Aisha feels herself panicking. She sees Claire's emotions spinning out of control and realizes that this situation is heading for disaster. She tries to calm Claire down, but her words sound powerless. "Claire, please understand me. This is all very complicated. My family, my faith. Your family and your faith will not give you happiness, Aisha. They only keep you in chains. Why don't you realize this?" Aisha feels Claire's words cutting into her soul. She cannot choose between love and fear, and this choice seems unbearable to her. She gets up, saying that she needs to leave, that she cannot continue this conversation. Claire remains sitting on the bench, looking at her with pain and despair. "If you leave now, it will be the end," Claire says, her voice trembling with emotion. "I can't live like this anymore, Aisha. I don't want to be your secret that you're ashamed of." Aisha pauses for a moment but can't find the words. She takes a step back, and then another, and finally turns and walks away, leaving Claire in the twilight park. Her heart is aching, her soul is torn, but she can't bring herself to go back. She feels like this step is the only way to protect herself from further suffering, but at the same time, it is the most suffering she has ever experienced. Claire leaves the park later that night, full of resentment and anger. Her obsession with Aisha becomes uncontrollable. She can't imagine life without her and doesn't want to accept it. The feeling of rejection turns into bitterness, and bitterness gradually turns into anger. Aisha paced nervously around the room, her thoughts revolving around Claire, and with each passing minute, the tension in her heart only grew. For the past few days, she had been avoiding messages from Claire, trying to pull herself together and think about how to proceed. Aisha realized that her love for Claire was turning into a dangerous obsession, and it scared her. She decided to end this relationship once and for all, no matter how hard it was, However, her plans are ruined by a call from Claire. She asks to see her again and hints that she is not ready to let Aisha go so easily. The feeling of threat is so strong that Aisha sees no other choice but to meet with her and explain everything directly. The evening stretched on insidiously in anticipation of a storm as Aisha headed to the park. The gloomy sky over the city was building up tension, and it seemed as if nature itself was preparing to witness a disaster. Aisha could feel a wave of fear and adrenaline filling her body, but she didn't stop. She knew that this meeting was crucial. Claire was already waiting for her by the lake. Her face, usually calm and confident, looked anxious. Aisha noticed that Claire was uncontrollably nervous, clenching her hands into fists and looking around as if she was anticipating something. When Aisha approached, there was a tense silence between them. Neither of them dared to start a conversation. Finally, Aisha broke the silence. "Claire, we can't go on like this. Our relationship is dangerous. I can't live like this anymore." Aisha's voice was firm, but deep down she was in pain. Claire grimaced in indignation. She took a step forward, her voice loud and angry. "Dangerous? Aisha, you're just a coward. You talk about love all the time, but when it comes down to it, you run away, hide behind your fears." Aisha felt her patience running out. These words were like a stab in the back. Every time she tried to explain her fears, Claire ignored her feelings. The pressure became so intense that she felt as if she were suffocating under the weight of a love that was supposed to bring freedom, but instead became a prison. "You don't understand," Aisha exclaimed, her voice breaking into a scream. "I have to hide, afraid of every look, every whisper behind my back, and you're just adding fuel to the fire." Claire came even closer, her eyes glittering with anger and contempt. "I'm adding fuel to the fire? I am the only one who tried to pull you out of this abyss of fear. But you don't even try to fight." Aisha felt her body tense with rage. Her heart was beating furiously, her mind clouded with emotion. Suddenly, a stone appeared in her hands, which she had automatically grabbed when she stepped on the ground near the lake. She raised her hand, not fully realizing what she was doing. Her gaze froze at Claire, who continued to accuse her, causing her even more pain with her words. "You leave me no choice, Claire. You're ruining me!" Aisha screamed, and without having time to comprehend her actions, dropped the stone. Claire opened her mouth in surprise, but did not have time to say anything. The blow was sharp and precise. Aisha felt the stone slam into Claire's temple, and she immediately disappeared from her field of vision, falling to the ground. Her face froze in disbelief and pain, and her body lay motionless, sprawled out by the water. Aisha froze, breathing heavily, her heart beating so loudly that it seemed like it was about to burst. She couldn't take her eyes off Claire, who was no longer moving. Her mind refused to accept the reality of what had just happened. Then it slowly began to sink in what she had done. Panic flooded her mind, and Aisha stepped back, gasping for breath. Her hands were shaking, and she felt the stones slipping from her fingers, falling to the ground. Everything was still quiet around her, as if the whole world had frozen, watching this terrible moment. Aisha rushed back, looking around to see if anyone had seen this terrible act. But the park was empty, silent and gloomy, as if hiding the secret of the murder. Aisha, barely able to stand, quickly ran away from the scene, leaving Claire alone on the cold ground by the lake. Her mind could not come to terms with what she had just done. Guilt was clutching at her throat, but she kept running, trying to erase the moment from her memory as if it were just a nightmare. Yet she knew that this moment would haunt her forever. The park around the lake was cordoned off with yellow tape as local police began to examine the crime scene in the morning. Claire's body was found by bystanders who immediately called the police. Detective Mark Lawson, an experienced investigator with many years of experience, took over the case, sensing that there was a personal drama behind the crime. At the crime scene, they found a stone with bloodstains, possibly the murder weapon, as well as some shoe prints on the wet ground near the lake. Detectives carefully examined the area, looking for any clues, and collected fingerprint samples from the stone. Lawson immediately realized that this case was not just random violence. It was something personal. As they began their investigation, detectives started by interviewing Claire's friends and acquaintances, trying to find out if she had anyone with whom she had a difficult relationship. Several of her close friends hinted that Claire had a secret romantic relationship, but did not give all the details. They also mentioned a girl named Aisha, with whom Claire had been seen frequently together recently. This information prompted the detectives to pay attention to Aisha, and they went to her home for questioning. When Lawson and his colleague showed up at her doorstep, Aisha looked depressed and anxious. Her anxious look and nervous movements immediately aroused the detectives' suspicions. "Aisha, we know that you were a close friend of Claire's," Lawson began, trying to keep his tone friendly. "We're trying to understand what might have happened that night. When was the last time you saw her?" Aisha tried to remain calm, but there was a tension in her voice as she replied, I haven't seen her in a few days. We haven't talked much lately." Lawson noticed her uneasiness and continued to probe, asking questions about their relationship. Aisha tried to look away, and her answers were evasive. The detectives decided to scrutinize her behavior and returned to the station, deciding to continue the investigation with a greater focus on evidence collection. The next day, the detectives received the results of the fingerprint analysis from the stone. They matched Aisha's prints. This was the first important piece of evidence linking her to the crime scene. Lawson decided not to act hastily and continued to collect evidence, learning more details about their relationship. Through Claire's friends, the detectives learned that the girls had been having conflicts recently. Several witnesses saw them arguing during one of their meetings, which confirmed the detectives' hypothesis about the tension between them. Aisha, according to her friends, always looked reserved and aloof, while Claire, on the contrary, was passionate and open. This difference in character could have led to a serious conflict. A thorough analysis of the shoe prints at the crime scene also yielded important results. They matched Aisha's shoe size, and although it was not yet direct evidence, the combination of fingerprints on the stone and footprints on the ground created a strong evidence base. The detectives invited Aisha back for questioning, this time having gathered enough evidence to make a reasonable charge. Lawson closely monitored her reactions during the interrogation, revealing all the evidence he had gathered to her. "Aisha, we have your fingerprints on the stone we believe to be the murder weapon," Lawson said calmly, looking into her face. "We also found footprints that match your shoes. It's not a coincidence." Aisha froze, her face pale. She realized that now any denial would be pointless. Tears appeared in her eyes, and she bowed her head, trying to avoid the detective's direct gaze. I didn't want to do it," she whispered, barely audible. "But she wouldn't let me go. She kept pressuring me, forcing me to do it." The detectives listened carefully to her confession, but they had already realized that the case could be considered solved. Aisha tried to justify herself, explaining that the situation had gotten out of hand, that it had happened by accident, in a fit of fear and despair. But the detectives knew that her fingerprints on the stone and the evidence of their arguments indicated otherwise. After her confession, Aisha was arrested and formally charged with Claire's murder. She realized that her life, ruined by decisions she could not control, would never be the same. Her love for Claire had become the poison that led to a tragedy from which there was now no way out. Lawson looked at her with sadness and understanding at the same time. He knew that this was not a story of victory, but of loss, of how love can destroy a life when it becomes an obsession. The silence in the courtroom was almost oppressive as the judge announced the verdict. Aisha sat in the dock with her head down, her eyes fixed on the floor. She listened to every word that was being said in the courtroom, but it seemed as if it was not happening to her. Her heart was heavy, crushed by guilt, and her mind was confused by pain and loss. Every word of the verdict hit her like a hammer. The court found her guilty of Claire's murder, and the sentence was inevitable. Aisha did not protest, did not justify herself. She accepted her fate with the bitter realization that she would never be able to return to a normal life again. Her only love, the only person who had made her feel true happiness and freedom, had now become a shadow that would haunt her forever. After the verdict was announced, Lawson remained seated in the courtroom, watching Aisha being led away. He relived the difficult case, thinking about how things had turned out so horribly. His experienced eye had always seen murder as the logical outcome of events, but this case made him think about deeper things: love, fear, and human weakness. Lawson recalled all those moments during the investigation when he tried to understand why Aisha took this step. She was no ordinary criminal. Her actions were just a crazy attempt to break free from the constraints that had been pressing on her for years. Her connection with Claire was the only way she could feel free, but in the end, it became a burden she couldn't bear. After the court hearing, Lawson left the courtroom and stood for a few minutes on the doorstep, staring at the gloomy sky. He thought about how love can sometimes destroy even the strongest of souls, how intense feelings can turn into bitterness and eventually lead to tragedy. This case showed him how thin the line between passion and danger is. Aisha spent the last few days before her imprisonment in her cell, immersed in her own thoughts. She replayed the happy moments she and Claire had spent together over and over again. The memories brought pain, but at the same time, they were the only things she had left of her past. One evening, sitting on the narrow bed in her cell, Aisha thought about how things might have turned out if she had found the strength to be honest, if she could have accepted her love for Claire without fear or shame. She realized that her greatest enemy was her fear of society and traditions that did not allow her to be herself. She paid a high price for this fear, losing her loved one and her own freedom. Her thoughts, filled with remorse and bitterness, now became her only companion in the cold cell. She knew that she would never be able to get rid of this pain, and that every moment of her life would remind her of how she had betrayed herself and her beloved. For Detective Lawson, the case also left a mark. He knew that most crimes have simple motives: money, jealousy, revenge. But this story was different. It reminded him how often people fall victim to their own feelings, how fear of public condemnation can push them to do extreme things. He realized that sometimes even the most sincere feelings can turn into a prison if they are not accepted and understood. As he walked to the car, Lawson thought of Aisha once again. He knew that her life was ruined, but deep down he hoped that she would find a way to understand her own mistakes and perhaps someday forgive herself. This case was a reminder to him of the fragility of the human heart. He left the court with the idea that true freedom always begins within us, and that even the deepest fears can be overcome if we allow ourselves to be ourselves.